They hurt me.
2 words, barely a whisper, but they hit Elias Calloway like a bullet he hadn't heard coming. He stood in his doorway, holding a lantern in one hand and a bourbon bottle in the other, staring down at 4 children collapsed on his porch in the worst blizzard Montana had seen in 20 years. The oldest couldn't have been more than 11. She was on her knees in the snow, holding a boy so small he looked like a bundle of rags, and she was looking up at Elias with eyes that had already seen things no child should survive long enough to describe. "Our father said you keep your promises," she said. "He said you were the last one left who does." Elias hadn't kept a promise in 2 years. He was about to remember how. If this story moves something in you, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. Every story we tell is made for you. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this one travels. Now let's go back to Harrow Creek, Montana, December 1888, and find out what happens when 4 orphaned children show up at a broken man's door in the middle of a blizzard, with nowhere else left to go. "They hurt me." Elias heard it before he saw anything. Just those 2 words drifting up through the howling dark, so faint he almost wrote them off as wind playing tricks on a man who'd been drinking since noon. Then the porch boards gave. Not once, 4 times, 4 separate impacts, one after another, the last one so small it barely registered at all. He set the bottle down, picked up the lantern, crossed to the door. When he opened it, the cold hit him like a fist. 20 below, wind off the Rockies, snow so fine and fast it moved more like smoke than anything solid. The lantern flame bent sideways and nearly went out. He cupped his hand around it and looked down. A girl, 11, maybe 12. Brown-red hair frozen to her forehead in strings, on her knees in the snow, both arms wrapped around a boy so small he looked like something she'd rescued from a river. Behind her, 2 more children had gone down against the porch railing. A dark-haired girl and an older boy. The boy's arms still locked around the girl, even in whatever unconscious place he'd fallen to. Still holding her, still protecting her, even when he had nothing left. 4 children, in a blizzard, on his porch. The girl looked up at him. Her eyes were gray-blue and bone-dry. No tears, no panic, no begging. Just a look that said she had already done everything that could be done, and this was the last door left to knock on. "They hurt me," she said again. Then, like she was reading from something her father had written down for her to memorize. "Our father said to find Elias Calloway in Harrow Creek. He said you were the only man left in Montana who still keeps his word." Elias had not kept his word to anyone in 2 years. He stepped aside. "Get in." She didn't say thank you. She just moved. He took the small boy first, youngest, lightest, most at risk, lifted him off her arms before she could argue, felt the child's hands cold as river stones through the blanket wrapped around him. The boy stirred, but didn't wake. Elias carried him to the cot near the forge, the one he'd never moved after Margaret died, because moving it meant something he wasn't ready to mean, and laid him down, and covered him with every blanket within reach. When he turned around, the older girl was already dragging the dark-haired girl through the door. The boy had gotten himself up, barely, one hand on the railing, face white as the snow outside, and was walking in under his own power with the particular stubborn dignity of someone who would rather fall down again than accept a hand. "Door," Elias said. The boy turned and kicked it shut behind him, leaned against it. Looked at Elias the way a man twice his age looks at another man he hasn't made up his mind about yet. "You're Elias Calloway," he said. "That's right. You worked Pinkerton out of Denver. 11 closed cases in 2 years. You and our father." Elias stopped moving. "Who's your father?" "Was," the older girl said from across the room. One word. Flat. The kind of flat that only comes after you've already broken apart and put yourself back together, because there wasn't time to stay broken. He looked at her. "Name." "Clara May Sutton. That's Nora. She's 7. Eli's the one by the door. He's 9. Sam's the little one on the cot. He's 5. She pulled off her outer coat, wrapped it around Nora, didn't waste a second doing it. "Our father was Daniel Sutton. He ranched the Clearwater Creek land, 400 acres east of town, all the way to the ridge." Daniel Sutton. Elias felt the name land in the middle of his chest and stay there. He and Daniel had worked 2 cases together back when Daniel was still with Pinkerton, before he left to marry Mary Haverford and raise cattle on land he'd saved 7 years to buy. Daniel Sutton was the kind of man who made you want to be better just by standing next to him. Had a handshake that meant something, a laugh that meant more, and a way of looking straight at you like you were worth the trouble of being looked at. Elias had gotten a letter when Clara was born, another when Eli came along. Then the letters stopped. The way letters stop when men get too busy being alive to stay connected. And then Margaret got sick. And after Margaret, there hadn't been much of anything. "Your father," Elias said. "How'd he die?" "Fire," Eli said. He pushed off from the door and walked to the center of the room. 9 years old, skinny as a fence rail, dark eyes that moved over everything and missed nothing. They said the lantern tipped, called it an accident, ruled it accidental same day it happened. Didn't even wait to look at the wreckage. His jaw tightened. It wasn't an accident. "Who's they?" "Judge Harlan Cross," Clara said. The room went quiet, except for the blizzard hammering the boards outside, and Sam breathing on the cot, and Nora making small sounds under the coats she'd been wrapped in. Elias crouched beside Nora. Her fingers were waxy at the tips, color wrong. He wrapped them in the cleanest rag he had and tucked her hands against her chest. She opened her eyes. Dark eyes, her mother's eyes probably, wide and glassy with cold and exhaustion. "You're safe," he said. "You're inside now. You're going to be okay." She looked at him like she was deciding whether to believe that. Then she closed her eyes again. He stood, turned to Clara. "Tell me everything, from the beginning. Leave nothing out." "Judge Cross wanted our land," Clara said. She sat on the workbench, straight-backed, hands in her lap, no fidgeting. "He sent a man 3 times, Chester Ames, offered Papa money each time, little more each time. Papa said no, all 3 times. What reason did Cross give for wanting it? Didn't give one the first 2 times. 3rd time, Ames told Papa the railroad was coming through the valley, and the land along Clearwater Creek was right in the path of the easement. Said Cross wanted to acquire it before the route went public and prices jumped." She looked at him steadily. Papa already knew about the railroad. He'd figured it out himself, months before. That's why he wouldn't sell. He said that land was going to be worth more than any of us could spend in a lifetime. And it belonged to us, and he wasn't handing it to a judge who'd done nothing to earn it. "What happened after the 3rd refusal?" "Papa got nervous." She said it without apology, like reporting weather. Not scared nervous, careful nervous. He rode to the county courthouse and spent a day looking at land records. When he came home, he didn't tell Mama what he found, but he sat me and Eli down. "What did he tell you?" Elias said. Eli answered this part. He'd clearly been waiting to. "He said there was a pattern. Men along the railroad route, men who owned land Cross wanted, kept having accidents. He had 4 names he was certain of, maybe more he couldn't confirm. Every death ruled accidental. Every property sold at auction shortly after. Every auction won by the same buyer. He reached into the oversized coat he was wearing, a man's coat, something grabbed off a hook in the dark, and pulled out a small leather ledger, water-stained but intact. He crossed the room and held it out to Elias. He kept records. He always said you can't fight anything you haven't written down. Elias took it. He told me specifically, Eli said. He said, Eli, if we ever have to run, you take that book and you give it to Elias Calloway. He said if you can't find Calloway, burn it, because the wrong hands would be worse than no hands at all. Elias opened the ledger. Daniel's handwriting, small and neat and precise, filled page after page. Dates, names, property descriptions, dollar amounts, transaction records that shouldn't exist in a private man's notebook unless he'd been quietly and carefully building a case for months. Near the back, a page with 5 names, a date beside each one, 2 words beside each date. Ruled accidental. At the bottom, a 6th entry. No date, just Daniel Sutton, Clearwater Creek, 400 acres, railroad easement value, $38,000. Buyer, Redemption Holdings, LLC. Elias had heard that name. Recently. He couldn't place where yet, but it would come. The night of the fire, he said. Walk me through it. Nora spoke first this time, without opening her eyes. We were asleep. It was past midnight. Mama came running. Clara picked up without a pause, like they'd told this story between themselves already, and divided it up so no single person had to carry all of it. She still had her nightgown on. She had Sam in her arms, and she was already running when she came through our door. She said, "Get up, go, window, now!" She didn't stop moving. She pushed us toward the window one by one and told us run to the barn and stay low and don't make a sound. And then, Elias said. She went back inside, Nora said. For Papa, Eli said. Neither of them said what came after that. They didn't have to. Elias looked down at the ledger so they couldn't see his face while he got it straight. You hid in the barn, he said. 3 hours, Clara said. We heard men outside. Voices. 2 of them, maybe 3. I recognized Chester Ames. I'd heard him enough times at the feed store. He has a way of dragging the end of his words. You'd know it anywhere. The other voice I didn't know. What were they saying? Checking the fire mostly, making sure it caught right. Her voice stayed level. Even. The level of someone who had made a decision to be even and was holding to it with everything she had. When they left, we waited another hour. Then I made a decision. What decision? She looked at him. That Sheriff Briggs wasn't going to help us. Why? Because Briggs eats Sunday supper at Cross's house 3 times a month, and the whole county knows it. She said it like this was the most obvious thing in the world, which, in a small Montana town in 1888, it probably was. Papa talked at supper every night. He said you should never keep information from your family. Information was what kept people safe. So we knew about Briggs. We knew about Cross. We knew about the railroad. A pause. We knew about you. What did he say about me? Something shifted in Clara's face. Not softening exactly, more like the moment before softening. The decision to let something through. He said you pulled a man out of a river once, when a bridge collapsed. Everyone else ran, but you went in. That was a long time ago. He said brave doesn't expire. She held his gaze. He said if we were ever in real trouble, with nowhere left to turn, we should find Elias Calloway. He said you were the kind of man who kept his word even when it cost him. A beat. Are you still that man? The forge crackled. Sam breathed on the cot. Outside, the blizzard threw itself against the walls like it had a grievance with the building personally. Elias thought about the bottle on the workbench, about the drawer with the pistol in it, about 2 years of making himself as small and quiet and harmless as possible, because making yourself small meant nothing else could get taken from you. "I'm going to try to be," he said. It wasn't the answer she'd asked for. It was the only honest one he had. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, short and decisive, like a woman closing a deal she wasn't entirely sure about, but had decided to commit to anyway. "Then we need your help." He fed them first. Beans from the pot on the forge, cornbread 2 days old but solid, dried apple from the tin on the shelf. He didn't talk while he did it, and neither did they, which was a kind of trust in itself, the willingness to be quiet together without filling it up with noise. Sam woke up when the smell of food reached him. He came awake the way 5-year-olds do, completely, instantly, no transition. 1 second asleep, the next sitting up on the cot, looking around at the workshop with wide blue eyes, like he was taking inventory. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at the forge. He looked at Elias. "Hello," he said. "Hello," Elias said. "Where are we?" "My workshop. In town." Sam thought about this. "Are you the man Papa told us to find?" "I'm going to try to be that man, yeah." Sam nodded seriously, looked at Elias's face with the focused attention of someone examining something genuinely interesting. "Your beard is very big," he said. Eli made a sound from across the room that might have been a laugh strangled before it could form. "I know," Elias said. "Papa said men with big beards were either very sad or very busy." Sam tilted his head. "Which are you?" "Both," Elias said. "I reckon." Sam absorbed this with the gravity of a philosopher. "Okay," he decided. "I'm hungry." This time Clara made a sound, something caught between a laugh and a sob that she converted, with visible effort, back into silence. But for just that 1 second, she was 11 years old again, instead of whatever she'd forced herself to become over the last 12 hours. Elias set a bowl in front of Sam without another word. After they ate, he put more wood on the forge and checked Nora's fingers and feet again. Color coming back, slow and pink and real. He found the second cot in the storage corner and set it up near the warmth. He went to the back of the workshop, where Margaret's trunk sat under a canvas, the one with her initials burned into the lid. M.A.C. Margaret Ann Calloway. The trunk he hadn't opened since the fall of 1886. He opened it now. Cedar and lavender came out. And underneath that, something that wasn't a smell exactly, more like the memory of one. The particular quality of absence that had become so familiar he'd stopped noticing it until right now, with 4 living children in the room reminding him what presence felt like. He took out the blankets, closed the trunk, didn't look at what else was inside. He brought the blankets to Eli, who took them without speaking. As Elias turned away, the boy said quietly, "Why are you doing this?" Elias stopped. "Your father was a better man than me, and he trusted me anyway. Seems like the least I can do is try to earn it." Eli was quiet for a moment. "He said you never let a partner down." He was more generous than the facts warranted. He wasn't generous about much. Eli looked at him directly. He was accurate. He said accuracy mattered more than kindness when you were trying to judge a man. Elias had no answer for that. So he just looked back at the boy until Eli dropped his eyes and pulled the blankets around himself and turned to face the wall. When all 4 were settled, when the breathing in the room had gone slow and even, Elias sat at the workbench with Daniel's ledger open in front of him and let himself think. Briggs was out. That was certain. Cross controlled every legal avenue in the county. That was obvious. He had a dead man's careful accounting of 6 murders. He had 4 children who couldn't stay hidden in a town this small for more than a day before someone noticed. He had a reputation that had gone from useful to gone over the course of 2 years of deliberate self-destruction. He had 6 bullets and a shaking hand, and the first genuine reason he'd had to get up in the morning since Margaret's grave closed. He also had, somewhere in this town, people who knew what Cross was doing and had stayed quiet because quiet was the only option they'd been able to see. He knew how that worked. He'd seen it in 6 different territories. Silence built in layers until it felt like the natural condition of things. Until speaking up felt like the violation instead of the crime underneath. But silence had a breaking point. Always did. And 4 orphan children showing up in a blizzard with a ledger full of dead men's names had a way of finding it. He looked at Clara sleeping against the wall, chin dropped to her chest, the steadiness finally gone from her face. Nothing left now but exhaustion, and the particular mark grief left when it carved itself into someone young. He looked at Sam, curled against her side, one small fist pressed to his cheek. He looked at Eli, face to the wall, arms wrapped around himself, protecting himself, even in sleep. He looked at Nora, one hand pressed flat to her coat, holding something against her chest. A scrap of cloth, he could see the edge of it now. Something from home. Something she hadn't let go of through 6 miles of blizzard. He picked up the bourbon bottle from the workbench, turned it over in his hand, looked at it for a long time. Then he walked to the door, opened it into the screaming cold, and upended the bottle. The bourbon poured out into the snow, brown against white, steaming slightly in the frozen air, and he watched it until there was nothing left. And then he watched the nothing for another moment, just to make sure he meant it. He came back inside, set the empty bottle on the shelf where he could see it, sat back down at the workbench. He wasn't sleeping tonight. Outside, the blizzard raged and howled and threw itself at every surface it could find. Inside, Elias Calloway's workshop, 4 children who had no one left in the world slept in the firelight, and the man who had spent 2 years making himself disappear opened a dead man's ledger and started reading. And for the first time since Margaret died, the silence in the room felt less like emptiness and more like something waiting to become something else. Not peace, not yet, but a direction. And sometimes, when everything else is stripped away, a direction is the only thing you need to take the first step. He turned to the first page and read until the storm began, finally, slowly, to let the darkness go. The sun came up at 6:43, but Elias had stopped watching for it somewhere around 4 in the morning, when his eyes finally refused the ledger, and he'd put it down and just sat in the quiet, listening to 4 children breathe. He'd counted the names in Daniel's ledger 3 times. 6 dead men, 6 properties along the proposed railroad easement, 6 transactions, all of them routed through Redemption Holdings, LLC. All of them signed off by Judge Harlan Cross in his capacity as County Recorder of Deeds. The amounts were insulting, pennies on the dollar for land that the railroad would pay 30, 40, 50 times more to acquire. The gap between what Cross paid and what Cross would collect ran into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Men had been hanged for less. Men had been hanged for far less. The problem was that in Harrow Creek, Montana, in December of 1888, Judge Harlan Cross was the man who decided who got hanged. Elias was still sitting with that problem when Sam woke up. The boy came out of sleep the same way he had the night before. All at once, fully present, no confusion about where he was. He sat up on the cot, looked around the workshop in the thin, gray morning light, saw Elias at the workbench, and climbed down and walked over in his stocking feet without hesitation, like this was something they did every morning. He pulled himself up onto the bench beside Elias and looked at the ledger. "What's that?" "Your papa's book." "The one Eli carried?" "That's right." Sam looked at it for a moment. He couldn't read yet, not well enough for Daniel's small, precise handwriting, but he studied the pages with serious attention, like he was paying respect to something he understood mattered, even if he didn't understand why. Then he looked up at Elias. "Did you sleep?" "No." "Why not?" "Lot to think about." Sam considered this. "Mommy used to say thinking too much at night was just worrying with better vocabulary." He said it perfectly, the cadence of it exact. The way children repeat things they've heard so many times, the words have become part of them. Then his face changed, just for a second, just a flash, and he looked down at his hands. Elias didn't say anything. He just sat there beside the boy and let the moment be what it was. After a while, Sam said, very quietly, "Is Mama coming back?" The question sat in the air between them. Elias looked at this 5-year-old boy with his father's blonde hair and his mother's round cheeks and understood that nobody had answered this question yet. That Clara had been managing survival, and Eli had been managing logistics, and Nora had been managing her own grief, and nobody had sat down with Sam and told him the plain and devastating truth, because there hadn't been time, and also because it was the hardest sentence in the English language to say to a child. "No, son," Elias said. "She's not." Sam's chin trembled once, just once. Then he pressed his mouth flat and nodded, the way he'd seen people nod at bad news, the way he'd learned from watching adults process things he wasn't supposed to have to process yet. "Papa either?" "No." Another nod, smaller this time. He put his hand on the ledger, flat-palmed, like he was touching something that had belonged to his father, which it had. "Okay," he said. Not like it was okay, like he was deciding to keep going anyway. Elias put his hand over Sam's. They sat like that until Clara stirred against the wall and opened her eyes and found them at the workbench, and something moved across her face. Relief, grief, gratitude, exhaustion, all of it at once, before she got herself straight and stood up. "How long have you been awake?" she said to Elias. "All night." "You should have slept." "Probably." He nodded at the ledger. "Your father was thorough. He had dates, names, transaction records, cause of death filings. He built a case, a real one, the kind that holds up." "Holds up where?" Eli said from the corner. He'd been awake longer than any of them had realized, lying still with his face to the wall, listening. He sat up now. "Cross controls the county court. Briggs controls the sheriff's office. Who's left to present it to?" "The territorial court in Helena," Elias said. "Or a federal circuit judge, if we can get one to ride out." He paused. "But we need more than the ledger. Cross will say Daniel fabricated it. He'll say a dead man's private notes aren't admissible, and he won't be entirely wrong. We need living witnesses, people who saw transactions happen, who can confirm the pattern exists." "Who's going to testify against Harlan Cross in this town?" Clara said. She wasn't being defeatist, she was being accurate, and she had her father's understanding that accuracy mattered more than comfort. Before Elias could answer, someone knocked on the door. Not hard, not aggressive. 3 knocks, measured and deliberate. The knock of someone who had decided to come and wasn't going to be talked out of it, but also wasn't going to pretend this was a casual visit. Elias was on his feet before the 3rd knock finished. He put himself between the door and the 4 children, without thinking about it, the way a man does things when something older than thought takes over. He checked the drawer. Pistol still there. He looked through the gap in the boards beside the door frame. A woman stood on his porch. 55, maybe. Small and straight-backed, in a gray wool coat. Hair the color of iron pulled back tight. A basket over one arm, and an expression on her face that said she had not come all this way in the cold to be turned away at the door. Ruth Dawson. She ran the general store on Main Street. Elias had bought coffee and tobacco from her for 2 years, and exchanged perhaps 40 words with her total, which, in his experience, meant she was either very private or very smart. And looking at her now, he thought it was probably both. He opened the door. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, looked around the workshop, registered the 4 children with an expression that started at surprise and moved quickly to something harder and more purposeful. Set her basket on the nearest flat surface and turned to Elias. "Chester Ames was on this street at 2 in the morning," she said. "I saw him from my upstairs window." He stopped outside your workshop and stood there for about 5 minutes, looking at your light, and then he rode off toward the Cross property. She said it the way she probably ran her inventory, efficiently, without decoration. "He'll have reported to Cross by now. Cross will know you have company." Elias looked at her. "You were watching at 2 in the morning." "I don't sleep well since my husband died." She said it without self-pity, just information. "Thomas has been gone 3 years. I've learned that the hours between midnight and dawn are when the things you're not supposed to notice tend to happen in this town." She opened her basket. Bread, a jar of preserves, a wrapped parcel that turned out to be 4 pairs of wool. "Your father bought seed from my store every spring for 7 years. Always paid on time. Always said please and thank you, which sounds like a small thing, but gets less common every year." She held Clara's gaze. "I was sorry to hear about the fire. I was sorrier when I understood it wasn't an accident." Clara sat up straighter. "You know it wasn't." "I know Thomas's death wasn't an accident either, and I know I can't prove it." Ruth pulled a chair from the corner, sat down like she'd been invited, folded her hands in her lap. "I've been keeping records since the month after Thomas died. Every land transaction that's run through Cross's office in 3 years. Every death that preceded a sale. Every auction where Redemption Holdings outbid everyone else." She looked at Elias. "I understand you have Daniel's ledger. News travels fast. In a town this small, everything travels fast. That's why Chester Ames already knows you have those children, Mr. Calloway. And that's why you have less time than you think." Nora had been sitting quietly in the corner with her blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching Ruth the way she watched everything. Carefully, completely, missing nothing. Now she said, "Did you know my mama too?" Ruth turned to her. Her expression changed, not softened exactly, but opened. "Yes, sweetheart. Mary Haverford, before she was Sutton. She used to come into the store with your father on Saturday mornings. She had a laugh you could hear from the street." She paused. "You have her eyes." Nora reached into the front of her coat and pulled out what she'd been holding all night. A piece of blue fabric, small, folded precisely, the kind of blue that had once been a dress, or a curtain, or something that lived in a home that didn't exist anymore. She held it in both hands and looked at it. "She made me a doll once from an old dress," she said. "I left it in the house." Nobody said anything. After a moment, Ruth reached across and put her hand briefly over Nora's. Just for a second. Then she straightened and looked back at Elias, because there was still business to attend to, and grief would have to wait. "There are 4 other women in this town in my situation," Ruth said. "Widows whose husbands died in ways that were ruled accidental by Cross. We've been meeting quietly for 2 years. We have records, letters, documents. Constance Reed's husband drowned in still water. He'd been swimming in that creek since he was 8 years old. Margaret Yates' husband fell from a ladder on a barn he'd built himself. Beth Holloway's husband died in a mine collapse 3 months ago. She has photographs of the support beam stacked neatly outside the shaft the morning after. She looked at Elias steadily. We have evidence. We've been waiting for someone to bring it to. Why didn't you go to Helena yourselves? Elias said. With what standing? Ruth said. 5 widows and a collection of suspicious documents? Cross has a brother-in-law in the Territorial Senate. He has allies in Helena who make inquiries disappear. We needed someone with history, with legal standing, with a name that meant something to bring this forward. She looked at him evenly. Daniel said if anything ever happened to him, Elias Calloway would come. We've been waiting 3 years for you to come. Elias looked at her. Then he looked at Clara, who was watching him with the same expression she'd had on the porch the night before. Not hope exactly, more like the place just before hope, where you haven't let yourself believe yet, but you're getting close. He looked at Daniel's ledger on the workbench. He thought about the names on that last page. 6 men, all ruled accidental, all dead in service of Harlan Cross's profit margin. He thought about what it would cost to fight this, what Cross would do when he understood someone was actually fighting. He thought about 2 years of making himself small and quiet and harmless, and the good it had done, which was none. Tell me about these women, he said to Ruth. Tell me what they have. She told him. She was organized, thorough, detailed. She spoke like someone who had been rehearsing this conversation in her head for a long time and was relieved to finally be having it. The evidence the widows have collectively gathered was substantial. Constance's letters from Chester Ames threatening her husband before his drowning. Margaret's record of a meeting where Thomas Yates was pressured to sell. Beth's photographs, and Ruth's own meticulous accounting of every Redemption Holdings transaction for 3 years, cross-referenced against the dates of each suspicious death. Eli had his knees pulled up to his chest and was listening to all of it with his dark eyes moving between Ruth and Elias, tracking every word. When Ruth finished, he said, "It's still all circumstantial." Cross will say coincidence. He'll say widows with grudges assembled data to fit a conclusion. He's right, Ruth said, looking at the boy with something that was almost respect. We need a witness, someone who can testify to direct knowledge of Cross's involvement, someone who is in the room. Chester Ames, Elias said. Ames will never talk. Cross owns him. Everybody has a price they won't go past, Elias said. The question is, what Ames's is. The knock that came next was different from Ruth's. Heavier, official. The knock of a man who wore a badge and knew it gave him the right to knock harder than other people. Elias moved to the door. He looked through the gap. A man stood on the porch in a deputy's coat, hat pulled low against the cold, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Not Cross's posture, not Ames's energy. This was someone uncomfortable, a man doing something he hadn't decided how he felt about yet. Walt Hensley, deputy sheriff. Elias had seen him around town for 2 years. A quiet, decent-looking man who kept his head down and his opinions to himself, and had 3 children who ran past the workshop on their way to school every morning. Elias opened the door. Walt looked at him, then past him at the 4 children visible in the workshop, then back at Elias. He took off his hat. "Morning, Calloway." "Hensley? I heard you had some visitors overnight." "Word gets around." Walt looked at his hat in his hands. He turned it once, twice, the gesture of a man organizing his thoughts. "Sheriff Briggs sent me to inquire about the Sutton children. There's been a report filed, missing persons. Cross's office is saying they're wards of the county now, parents deceased, and they need to be placed in proper care until the estate is settled." "Proper care," Elias said. "That's the language used, yes." "Cross want them housed at his property while the estate is settled?" Walt's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I don't know the specifics of the arrangement. I think you do. A long pause. Walt looked past Elias at Clara, who had come to stand a few feet behind him. She looked at Walt with no expression at all, which was somehow worse than if she'd looked afraid. She's 11 years old, Walt said, low, more to himself than to anyone else. She walked 6 miles in a blizzard, carrying her 5-year-old brother to get away from whoever burned her house down, Elias said. You want to tell me what proper care looks like for a child who did that? Walt put his hat back on. He looked at Elias directly. I've got 3 kids of my own, he said quietly. My boy Jacob is 14. Plays with Eli Sutton sometimes at the creek in summer. He stopped, started again. I'm telling you what I was sent to tell you. I'm not telling you what to do about it. What would you do about it? Elias said. If it was Jacob. Walt held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he said, I'd find someone with Daniel Sutton's ledger, and I'd get it in front of a federal circuit judge before Cross could bury it. Judge Alan Porter is riding circuit through Helena right now. He's not Cross's man. He came up through the federal system. Cross has no reach there. He said it like he was reciting something he'd memorized, fast and flat, and just loud enough for Elias to hear. Porter will be in Helena until the 28th. That's 9 days. He turned and walked off the porch. Elias watched him go. Then he closed the door and turned around. Ruth was looking at him with an expression that was the closest thing to relief he'd seen on her face. Walt Hensley has been waiting for a reason, she said quietly. He's not a bad man. He's been a scared one. 9 days, Clara said. She had heard everything. Can we get to Helena in 9 days? Riding hard in this weather, 4 days each way, Elias said. Which means we have 1 day to gather everything we need, and we leave tomorrow morning. We're going with you, Clara said. You're staying here. We are not staying here. Her voice had an edge in it now. Not anger, but absolute certainty. The certainty of someone who has survived too much to accept being left behind. Cross wants us. Ames knows where we are. If you leave and take the ledger, we have no protection. If you take us, at least we're with someone. Eli stood up. She's right. Nora looked up from her piece of blue cloth. I want to go. Sam raised his hand like he was in school. Me too. Elias looked at these 4 children. He thought about telling them it was too dangerous, too cold, too hard. He thought about the 6 miles they'd already walked in the dark in 20 below weather, and the fact that 3 of them had done it with frost-bitten feet, and not one of them had quit. Can you ride? He said. Papa taught us, Clara said. All 4 of you? Sam rides with me, she said. He has since he was 3. Ruth stood and picked up her basket. I'll have the women gather everything we have by this evening. Letters, photographs, transaction records, all of it. She looked at Elias. You get those children to Judge Porter. We'll take care of everything here. Cross will come for you when he figures out I'm gone. Then we'll be ready for him, Ruth said, with a quietness that was more frightening than any raised voice. She moved toward the door, then stopped. She looked back at Clara. Your father talked about you, she said, every Saturday morning when he came in. He said you were going to be formidable. She held Clara's gaze. He wasn't wrong. Clara held herself very still. Thank you, ma'am. Ruth left. The workshop went quiet again, except for the fire and the wind, and Sam, who had climbed back onto the cot and was examining the wood carving Elias had noticed him picking up twice this morning. A rough shape, barely recognizable as a horse, that Elias had made years ago, for no particular reason, and left on a shelf and forgotten. Can I have this? Sam asked, holding it up. Elias looked at it. a piece of wood he'd carved one sleepless night when Margaret was first sick and he'd needed his hands to be doing something. He'd never given it a name, never given it to anyone. "Yeah," he said, "it's yours." Sam held it against his chest, the way Nora held her piece of blue cloth, like a small, solid thing in a world that had become unreliable. Elias turned back to the workbench and opened Daniel's ledger again. 9 days. 1 day to prepare. 4 days to Helena. He began making a list of everything they would need, and as he wrote, Eli came and sat beside him and watched the pen move across the paper. And after a while, the boy said, very quietly, "We're going to make it, aren't we?" It wasn't quite a question. Elias kept writing. "I intend to see to it," he said. Outside, the blizzard had finally broken. The wind had dropped overnight, and the sky was beginning to clear from the west, that pale winter blue coming in slow over the mountains, like a promise nobody had made yet, but might still keep. Inside the workshop, Elias Calloway wrote his list and planned his route, and felt the particular weight of 4 children depending on him settle into his bones and stay there, heavy and real, and more alive than anything had felt in 2 years. He didn't reach for the bottle on the shelf. He didn't look at it once. They had 1 day to prepare, and Elias intended to use every hour of it. He sent Clara and Eli through the back of the workshop to Ruth Dawson's store with a list written in his hand and strict instructions to use the alley, not the street, and to come straight back. Clara took the list without comment. Eli took the route without needing to be told twice. They moved like children who had learned the hard way that caution was not timidity, it was intelligence. Sam stayed at the workbench, holding his wooden horse and watching Elias check the horses in the small stable attached to the back of the workshop. Nora sat on the cot with her piece of blue cloth pressed to her chest, quieter than she'd been since they arrived, the kind of quiet that meant something was working through her that hadn't finished yet. Elias was checking the second saddle's girth strap when Nora appeared in the stable doorway. "Mr. Calloway," she said. "Elias," he said, not looking up from the strap. "Mr. Calloway was my father. He didn't deserve the name." A pause. "Elias," she said, trying the word out like it was new furniture she wasn't sure fit the room. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask me anything." "Do you think they were scared?" She said it carefully, like she'd been holding the question for a long time and was only now sure she could say it without breaking apart. "Mama and Papa, at the end. Do you think they were scared?" Elias set down the strap. He turned and looked at her, this 7-year-old girl with her mother's dark eyes and her father's directness, and the particular gravity of a child who was asking a real question and would know if she got a false answer. "I think your mama was thinking about you," he said. "When she went back inside, I don't think there was room for scared." Nora turned this over. "Papa used to say the bravest thing a person could do was love someone so much you stopped thinking about yourself." She looked at her piece of cloth. "I think that's what she did." "I think so too." She was quiet for another moment. Then she came into the stable and stood beside him and watched him work. And after a while she said, "I'm going to be okay. I just needed to say that out loud to someone." Elias looked at her. "Yeah," he said, "I believe you." She went back inside, and he went back to the saddle, and neither of them made anything more of it, which was exactly right. Clara and Eli returned from Ruth's store 40 minutes later with saddlebags loaded and faces that said the journey back through the alley had not been entirely uneventful. Ames was on Main Street, Eli said, before he'd fully come through the door. On horseback, just riding slow, back and forth, not going anywhere, watching. "Did he see you?" "No, we stayed in the alley. But he's been there a while. Mrs. Dawson said he rode past her store 3 times before we got there. Elias looked at the saddlebags. Supplies for 5 people, 4 days each way. He looked at the sky through the small, high window. The blue that had started coming in from the west this morning was holding. Cold, but clear. Riding weather, if you were willing to be cold, which they didn't have the luxury of not being. "We leave at first light," he said. "Not dawn, before dawn, when it's still dark enough that Ames can't see the stable door from the street." "That's 4 in the morning," Clara said. "That's right." She nodded. No complaint, no argument. She started organizing the supplies into the saddlebags with the systematic efficiency she brought to everything. And Eli moved to help her. And Sam watched them both, with his wooden horse in one hand, and the serious expression of a boy who understood something important was happening, even if he didn't have all the details. The knock came at 2 in the afternoon, and it was nothing like Ruth's knock, and nothing like Walt Hensley's knock. This one was brisk and unsentimental. 3 sharp raps, the knock of someone with somewhere to be. Elias looked through the gap in the boards. A woman stood on his porch, black coat, dark hair pulled back, medical bag in her right hand. 45, maybe 48. She had the kind of face that had been pretty once, and had traded pretty for something better. Sharp and direct, and completely unconcerned with whether you found it approachable. He opened the door. "Dr. Agnes Wheeler," she said, stepping inside without waiting. She looked at Elias with the frank, assessing gaze of someone who had spent 20 years deciding quickly whether patients were going to be honest with her or waste her time. "Ruth Dawson sent me. She said you have 4 children with possible frostbite and a man who hasn't slept in 36 hours and is about to ride 4 days to Helena in December." She set her bag on the workbench. She wasn't wrong on any count from the look of things. "The children are fine," Elias said. "Frostbite was mild." "I'll be the judge of that." She turned to the children without further preamble. "Who's worst off?" "Nora's fingers," Clara said immediately. "And her right foot, 2nd and 3rd toes." Agnes crossed to Nora and crouched in front of her. "May I look, sweetheart?" Nora held out her hands. Agnes examined them with careful, efficient hands, pressing gently, watching Nora's face for reaction. "Does this hurt?" "A little." "Good. A little means feeling is coming back. A lot would worry me. Nothing would worry me more." She moved to the foot, checked both toes, sat back. "She'll be fine. Keep her warm and don't let her walk on it more than necessary today." She stood, looked at Elias. "How long have you been sober?" The directness of it landed like a flat stone dropped on a table. Elias held her gaze. 36 hours. "And before that?" 2 years of not. She absorbed this without visible judgment. "Withdrawal will hit you somewhere between 48 and 72 hours. Shaking, sweating, possibly worse. You're planning to ride to Helena in that condition." "I'm planning to ride to Helena, regardless of the condition." She looked at him for a moment. Then she opened her bag and took out a small glass bottle. "This will help with the physical symptoms. Not eliminate them. Help. 2 drops in water, morning and evening. Don't take more than that." She set it on the workbench. "And you need to eat something that isn't coffee. When did you last eat a real meal?" "Yesterday sometime." "Before or after you decided to stop drinking?" "After." "So your body is running on nothing while it's also trying to recalibrate 2 years of bourbon dependency." She said it matter-of-factly, no cruelty in it. Just the clean honesty of a woman who believed that people deserved accurate information about their own situations. "Sit down." "I don't need to." "Mr. Calloway." She looked at him with an expression that had probably stopped arguments in their tracks for 20 years. "You have 4 children who need you functional. Sit down and let me do my job." He sat down. She checked his pulse, looked at his eyes, asked him several questions he answered without elaborating, and when she was done, she stood back and crossed her arms. "You're in better shape than you have any right to be. The 2 years of damage is real, but your underlying constitution is sound." A pause. "Your hands are going to shake for the next few days. That's not negotiable. That's chemistry. Everything else is manageable if you eat, sleep when you can, and take what I gave you." "Thank you," Elias said. "Don't thank me yet." She picked up her bag, glanced at Clara. "You're the oldest." "Yes, ma'am." "You've been managing this family." "Yes, ma'am." Agnes looked at her for a long moment, not the way adults usually looked at Clara, with a kind of uncomfortable pity that made Clara feel like a problem to be solved. She looked at her the way she'd look at a colleague, appraising, respectful. "You've done well," she said simply. "Better than most grown people would have." She turned toward the door, then stopped. She turned back to Elias. "Cross is going to move tonight or tomorrow morning. Walt Hensley came to see me this afternoon, before he came here. He wanted me to know that Ames filed a report at the sheriff's office an hour ago. Missing persons, imminent danger, requesting authorization to search private property." The room went very still. "Briggs signed it," Agnes said. "Walt wouldn't. He's on administrative suspension as of this afternoon." Elias stood up. "How long before they can execute the search?" "Briggs has to file it with the county recorder for Cross to stamp. Cross will stamp it immediately. Technically, they need 24 hours after filing before they can act on it." She met his eyes. "Technically." "We leave tonight," Elias said. He said it to the room, not to any one person. "In the dark," Clara said. "In the dark. We'll be 2 hours north before Ames figures out the workshop is empty." He looked at Agnes. "Is there anything else I need to know?" She reached into her coat pocket and brought out a folded piece of paper. "Ruth's women compiled everything they have. Signed affidavits, document copies, photographs. It's all there." She held it out. "Get it to Porter." He took it. Their fingers didn't touch, but the transfer felt like something more than paper changing hands. Like the weight of everything the widows had carried for 3 years, passing into a space where it might finally become something other than private grief. Agnes moved toward the door. Elias said, "Why are you doing this?" She stopped. She didn't turn around immediately. When she did, her expression was complicated. Not quite what he expected from a woman who presented everything as straightforward. "My husband was the army surgeon at Wounded Knee," she said. "He wrote letters home about what he saw there. After he died, his commanding officer came to me and told me the letters were the property of the United States Army, and took them." She looked at Elias steadily. "I know what it looks like when powerful men decide that the truth belongs to them. I've known it for 7 years. I'm tired of knowing it." She opened the door. "Don't get those children killed, Mr. Calloway." She left. Sam, who had been sitting perfectly still on the cot throughout this exchange, said, "I like her." "She's terrifying," Eli said. "That's why I like her," Sam said. There was no time to waste on the smile that tried to form on Elias's face. He turned to practical things, checking the horses again, distributing the weight in the saddlebags, finding the warmest coats in the trunk he'd opened that morning. 2 of them had been Margaret's, winter coats she'd never worn because the last 2 winters she'd been too sick to go out in the cold. He held one of them for a moment. Heavy wool, dark blue. Her smell completely gone from it now, replaced by cedar and thyme. He held it out to Clara. Clara looked at it. She understood what it was without being told. "I can't." "She'd want someone to use it," Elias said. She was practical that way. Clara took it. They ate at 5 o'clock, the rest of what Ruth had sent, every scrap of it, because they needed the fuel, and because there was something important about sitting together at a table and eating a meal like people who intended to keep going. Sam ate with his wooden horse propped against his bowl. Nora ate slowly, carefully, her right foot elevated on a second chair, the way Agnes had instructed. Eli ate fast and efficiently, already somewhere in his head running calculations Elias recognized because he ran them himself. Routes, distances, contingencies. The particular arithmetic of people who are planning to survive something. At 8 o'clock, Elias sent them to sleep. All 4 of them. No arguments. He told them they had 3 hours, and they needed all of it, and he would wake them when it was time. Clara started to object, and he looked at her with the expression he was developing specifically for the moments when Clara May Sutton's extraordinary capability threatened to override her equally extraordinary need to occasionally let someone else carry something. She went to sleep. He sat at the workbench with the combined evidence: Daniel's ledger, Agnes's folded documents, the 6 photographs Beth Holloway had sent of the mine's support beams, Ruth's accounting records, and he organized it all into an oilskin packet that would survive weather and handling and the particular roughness of 4 days of hard riding. He wrote a cover letter to Judge Alan Porter, explaining the chain of evidence, the timeline, the names. He wrote it twice, kept the second version, burned the first in the forge. At 10:45, Chester Ames knocked on the front door. Not 3 measured knocks, not Ruth's deliberate rap. One single heavy blow, fist to wood, the kind of knock that was less a request than a statement. Elias was at the door before the echo died. He looked through the gap. Ames stood on the porch alone, which told Elias either he was supremely confident or supremely stupid. And the history in Daniel's ledger suggested he wasn't stupid. His coat was open despite the cold. His hand rested near his holster in the studied casual way of a man who wanted you to notice that it did. Calloway. His voice was exactly what Clara had described. Low, rough, with that particular drag at the end of words like he was chewing on them. Open the door. I'm not inclined to, Elias said through the gap. I got authorization to... You got authorization to search the property with 24 hours notice after filing, Elias said. Filed an hour ago by my count, so you've got 23 hours yet. He paused. Unless you want to tell me you're not here on official business, in which case you're just a man standing on my porch uninvited at 11 at night, and I've got a different set of options for dealing with that. Silence on the other side of the door. Those kids are wards of the county, Ames said finally. Those kids are the children of Daniel Sutton, who named a legal guardian in a witnessed will before he died. I've engaged a lawyer in Helena to file the appropriate documentation. This was not entirely true yet, but Elias intended to make it true as soon as physically possible. Until that's resolved, you've got no authority over them, and you know it. Another silence. Longer. Cross isn't going to let this go, Ames said. Not threatening. Something closer to informational. The voice of a man delivering a message he'd been told to deliver, but hadn't been told how to feel about. You understand that. I'm counting on it, Elias said. He heard Ames shift his weight on the porch boards, then footsteps retreating. The sound of a horse moving away down the frozen street. Elias counted to 60 after the sound disappeared. Then he went to the back of the workshop and put his hand on Eli's shoulder. The boy was already awake. I heard, Eli said quietly. Get your sisters up, quietly. We're leaving now. They were out of the stable and moving north through the back streets of Harrow Creek inside of 20 minutes. 5 people and 3 horses in the deep cold of a Montana December night. the sky above them sharp and clear and riotous with stars. Sam rode in front of Clara, wrapped in her arms, already half asleep again, with a particular trust of a child who had decided that where his sister was safe by definition. Nora rode with Elias, her back against his chest, her right foot cradled in a way that kept the pressure off the damaged toes. Eli rode the third horse alone, which had been a brief negotiation. He'd wanted his own horse, and Elias had given it to him because some things were worth more than the marginal safety risk. They didn't speak for the first mile. The town fell away behind them, and the road opened up into the vast white dark of the Montana plain, and the only sounds were hooves on frozen ground and wind and the enormous silence of a country that didn't care at all about the small, human drama moving through it. Then Sam said, from inside Clara's arms, not quite asleep after all, "Are we going to be okay?" Clara looked at Elias across the space between the horses, not asking him, checking him, making sure he understood that whatever he said to Sam, she needed it to be true. Elias thought about Judge Porter and Helena. He thought about the oilskin packet against his chest. He thought about Ruth Dawson's iron composure and Agnes Wheeler's terrifying competence, and Walt Hensley's 9 words delivered fast and flat on his porch that morning. He thought about Daniel Sutton, who had kept records when everyone else was looking away, who had trusted a broken man with his children's lives because he believed in what people could become when they had a reason. "Yeah," Elias said, "we're going to be okay." He meant it. He was not certain of it, but he meant it, and sometimes that was the only honest ground you had to stand on when you were riding north in the dark with 4 orphan children and everything they needed to survive in a packet against your heart. They rode into the dark and the cold and the stars, and behind them, Harrow Creek sat quiet and still. And in the morning, Chester Ames would find an empty workshop and a cold forge, and 4 pairs of small footprints in the snow that the night wind was already beginning to cover. They rode through the first night without stopping. Elias set the pace, steady, not punishing, the kind of pace that 8 miles without breaking horses or children. He watched the sky more than the road, using stars the way he'd learned to use them 20 years ago in territories where roads were suggestions and landmarks were the only truth. Sam slept against Clara's chest for the first 3 hours, then woke up and watched the darkness go by with wide, quiet eyes, not asking questions, just taking it in the way children take in things they understand are important, even when they can't name why. Nora didn't sleep. She sat in front of Elias with her back against his chest and her right hand wrapped in the cloth Agnes had given them. And sometime around the 2nd hour she said, very softly so only he could hear, "Mama used to hum when she was scared." What did she hum? "I don't know the name of it. Just a hymn. Something slow." She was quiet for a moment. "I can't remember the tune anymore. I keep trying, and it keeps sliding away." Elias thought about Margaret, about the particular terror of forgetting. The way grief had a second edge that the first wave of it didn't warn you about. The slow erosion of specific things. A voice, a laugh, the exact way someone held a coffee cup. He'd spent 2 years in a bottle, partly trying not to experience that erosion, and had experienced it anyway. Because bourbon didn't actually stop anything. It just made you less present for the loss. "It won't go away completely," he said. "The things that are really yours don't go all the way. They go quiet sometimes, but they don't go away." Nora thought about this for a long time. Then she settled back against him a little more and closed her eyes. And he didn't know if she slept, but she stopped carrying herself quite so rigidly. And that was something. By the second morning, they were 30 miles north and the town of Harrow Creek was a memory, behind a range of hills that had swallowed it completely. They stopped at a creek to water the horses and eat what Ruth had packed: dried venison, hardtack, 2 apples that were soft but edible. And Elias took the 2 drops Agnes had told him to take and washed them down with creek water so cold it hurt his teeth. His hands had started shaking overnight. Not badly yet, just a fine tremor that he noticed when he held the reins, a vibration at the edges of his control that hadn't been there 2 days ago. He kept his hands moving so the children couldn't see it clearly. Eli saw it anyway. He came and stood beside Elias at the creek while Clara helped Nora with her boot and Sam threw pebbles at the water, with the focused dedication of a boy who had found the one thing he was in charge of. "You're shaking," Eli said. Not accusatory, observational, the way he said most things. "I know." "Is it the drinking? Stopping, I mean?" "Yes." Eli looked at the creek. "Papa quit tobacco once. He said the 3rd day was the worst. He said after the 3rd day, your body stops fighting you." "That's about right. Today's the 2nd day." "I know that too." Eli was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I can take the evidence packet, carry it on my horse. So if something happens to you—" "Nothing's going to happen to me." "But if it did," Eli said, with the patient insistence of a 9-year-old who had learned that adults saying, "nothing's going to happen," didn't actually prevent things from happening. "If it did, I'd have it. I'd know what to do with it. Get to Porter, present the ledger, the affidavits, the photographs." Elias looked at this boy, this 9-year-old son of Daniel Sutton, who had carried his father's ledger through a blizzard and memorized the route to Helena, and was now calmly planning contingencies for the death of the only adult in the group. "You'd know what to tell Porter?" Elias said. "I've been going over it in my head since yesterday. The timeline, the names, the chain of evidence. Papa taught me how to organize an argument. He said logic was just storytelling in the right order." He met Elias's eyes. "I know the story." Elias reached into his coat and took out the oilskin packet. He held it for a moment. Everything that 6 dead men's families needed. Everything that 4 children had survived to deliver. Then he opened the packet, took out the copy of the cover letter he'd written, and put the packet in Eli's saddlebag. "Back up," Elias said. "Not because I'm planning to need it, because your father would have called it good planning." Eli zipped the bag closed. "He would have," he agreed, and went back to his horse. They pushed hard on the 2nd day, and harder on the 3rd, because on the morning of the 3rd day, Elias spotted riders on the ridge behind them. He didn't say anything to the children at first, just watched from the corner of his eye, tracking the distant shapes against the white hillside, counting. 2 riders, moving at a pace that wasn't casual and wasn't panicked, deliberate, sustained, the pace of men who knew where their quarry was going and had calculated that they had enough time to intercept before it arrived. He pulled his horse alongside Clara's. "Don't look back," he said quietly. "Keep the same pace, same direction. Act like we're just riding." Clara looked straight ahead. "How many?" "2. "Ames?" "Can't tell yet. Probably." "How far back?" "1.5 miles, maybe 2. She absorbed this without changing her expression or her posture. Sam, in front of her, was watching a hawk circle overhead and hadn't noticed anything. She kept her arms loose around him, her voice steady. "What do we do?" "We stop acting like we're just riding," Elias said. "And we start actually riding." He didn't have to say it twice. Clara pressed her heels to her horse, and it surged forward. And Eli was right behind her, having heard enough from his position to understand. And Elias came last, with Nora pressed against his chest, and the horses opened up into a real run across the frozen plain, with the cold air screaming past them, and the ridge behind them receding, but the riders on it coming faster now too, abandoning the pretense of patience. They ran for 20 minutes. The horses were good stock. Ruth Dawson had made sure of that when she'd helped Elias pick them. But they were carrying 5 people and supplies, and they were on their 3rd day, and good stock had limits, like everything else. Elias pulled them to a stop at a stand of cottonwoods beside a frozen creek bed. He swung down from his horse and helped Nora down, and turned to look at the ridge. The riders had stopped too, still on the high ground, still 2 of them, watching. "Why'd they stop?" Eli said. "Same reason we did," Elias said. "Horses." He looked at the position of the sun. 2 hours of daylight left. "And because they're thinking. They don't want to catch us in the open, take the evidence by force, and have witnesses to explain away. They want to do it quiet." He watched the distant figures. "They're going to try to get ahead of us." "Cut us off," Clara said. "There's a pass about 8 miles north. Only way through the range at this time of year that doesn't add 2 days to the ride. If they know this country better than I do they?" Elias thought about Chester Ames, about the fact that Cross had been operating in this territory for 3 years, buying land, running routes, making arrangements. About the fact that a man like Cross hired men who knew the land because knowing the land was part of the job. "Yes," he said. The 4 children looked at him, not panicking, waiting the way they'd learned to wait, with attention and without wasted motion, trusting that the information was coming and they'd deal with it when it arrived. "There's another way through," Elias said. He hadn't planned to use it because it was harder, colder, and required crossing a creek that was only frozen enough to walk horses over if you were careful and a little lucky. "Takes an extra 4 hours and we'd have to cross the Bitter Creek ice. But they won't expect it, and they won't follow. Not on horseback, not on that ice." "Is it safe?" Clara said. Elias looked at Sam, at Nora's wrapped hand, at the way Eli was sitting his horse with his father's ledger in the saddlebag behind him, straight-backed, watching him. "Safe enough," Elias said, "if we're careful." They were careful. The Bitter Creek crossing took an hour, and every minute of it was the specific terror of listening to ice speak under weight. That low moan and crack that meant the surface was working with the load placed on it, evaluating, deciding. Elias went first, alone, walked his horse 10 feet onto the ice, stopped, listened, came back and told them they'd go one at a time, with 30 feet of distance between each crossing. Sam went with Clara. Elias watched from the bank, his hand not quite steady on his own reins. And he didn't breathe properly until Clara's horse stepped off the far bank, and she turned and waved from the other side. Nora went next, walking her horse herself. She insisted, and Elias let her because she was right that it was better than having the horse feel 2 uncertain riders, and because the look on her face when he agreed was something he didn't want to take from her. Eli went last. Halfway across, the ice made a sound that Elias had only heard once before in his life, and it wasn't a good memory. He started forward involuntarily. Eli looked at him from the middle of the creek, looked at him just for 1 second, with an expression that was fear and also determination, and also something that was almost peace. The look of a boy who had decided the size of what he was doing. And then he kept walking. 1 step, 2. The sound didn't come again. The far bank came up and the horse stepped off, and Eli stepped off behind it, and exhaled hard enough that Elias could see it from 30 feet away. Elias crossed last. On the other side, he stood beside Eli, and they both looked back at the creek. Then Eli said, "Papa would have hated that." And Elias almost laughed again, and this time it came out less rusty than before. They made camp in a dry ravine that blocked the wind on 3 sides, and got a small fire going from wood Elias found wedged in the rock. Dead cottonwood, dry enough to burn without much smoke. 5 people around a fire small enough that they were all close together by necessity. And necessity had a way of becoming something else when you stopped resisting it. Sam fell asleep immediately, curled against Clara, with the wooden horse pressed to his chin. Nora sat close to the fire, with her wrapped hand extended toward the warmth, not sleeping, working through something privately in the way she always did, turning it over in herself until it settled. Eli took the first watch without being asked. He sat just outside the firelight, with his back to a rock and his eyes on the dark. And Elias thought about telling him to sleep, and decided against it, because some things a person needed to do, and you understood that by looking at them. Elias sat across from Clara. She was the only one looking at him directly, which was because she was Clara, and looking at things directly was her baseline condition. "Third day," she said quietly. "Heading into it. You're shaking more than this morning." "I know." She looked at the fire for a moment. "Mama used to say the hardest things always asked for the worst timing. Said it was like they waited until you were already stretched thin before they showed up." She looked back at him. She wasn't wrong. "No," Elias said. "She wasn't." "Did you know her? Mama, I mean?" "I knew your father better. Met your mother twice, maybe 3 times, back when Daniel was still with Pinkerton." She had a laugh. "You could hear it from the street," Clara said. "Mrs. Dawson said that too." "She did." Clara smiled at that. Small, brief, but real. The first smile he'd seen on her that wasn't Sam-induced. That came from something inside her own chest, rather than from her youngest brother's particular genius for forcing joy into impossible situations. "She used to dance in the kitchen," Clara said, "when she thought nobody was watching. Papa would sneak up behind her and grab her hands, and they'd dance around the table, and Nora would try to copy them and knock things over." She kept her eyes on the fire. Sam was too little. He'd just sit in the middle of the floor and laugh at everything. She said it the way people say the things they're afraid of losing. Out loud, into the air, like speaking it makes it real. And real things have a better chance of surviving than things kept only in the mind. "Tell me more," Elias said. She looked at him. "You want to hear this?" "I knew your father. I'd like to know your mother. I'd like to know the family he built." He meant it completely. "Tell me." So she told him. Sitting by a small fire in a frozen ravine in Montana, with her brothers and sisters sleeping around her, Clara May Sutton talked about her family. Not the end of it, not the fire, not the blizzard, but the living of it. The Saturday morning trips to Ruth's store. The way her father could fix anything mechanical, but couldn't cook a single thing that didn't come out burned on the outside and raw in the middle. The way her mother kept a garden that shouldn't have survived Montana winters, but did, out of what Clara now understood was sheer personality. The way the 4 of them had been assigned specific jobs and taken them seriously, and argued about whose job was harder, with the particular passion of children who have been raised to believe that their voice matters in a family conversation. Elias listened to all of it. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. He just let her talk until the fire burned low and her voice slowed. And when she finally went quiet, she looked at him with an expression that was exhausted and lighter at the same time. The particular combination of a person who has set something down they've been carrying alone. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For listening like it mattered." "It does matter." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, very quietly, "Papa was right about you." Elias didn't answer, because the words had hit somewhere he wasn't prepared for them to hit. Somewhere that was still raw and tender and not fully healed. The place where Daniel Sutton's trust lived alongside Margaret's cedar-smelling coats and the empty bourbon bottle on a shelf in Harrow Creek. He just nodded and looked at the fire. In the morning, they rode the last stretch to Helena. The third day had been the worst. Elias's hand shook so badly during the first hour that Nora, riding in front of him, reached back without looking and wrapped both her small hands around his right hand on the reins and held on. She didn't say anything about it. She just held on until the shaking settled to something manageable, and then she let go, and neither of them mentioned it. They came into Helena from the North Road at 2 in the afternoon on the fourth day, cold through to the marrow, stiff in every joint, horses blowing great clouds of breath into the frozen air. Helena was bigger than Harrow Creek by an order of magnitude. Telegraph offices, hotels, a courthouse that looked like someone had meant it, streets with actual planking rather than packed dirt. After 4 days of open country, it felt almost overwhelming. "Stay close," Elias said, and all 4 of them moved closer without having to be asked. He found the federal courthouse on the 2nd Street east of the main thoroughfare, a solid stone building with a territorial seal above the door, and a clerk inside who looked up from his desk with the professionally bored expression of a man who had seen everything and expected nothing interesting from today. "Judge Alan Porter," Elias said. "Is he in session?" "He recesses at 3, the clerk said. "It's 20 past 2. You'll need an appointment for—" "My name is Elias Calloway. I was a Pinkerton detective for 7 years out of Denver. I have documented evidence of 6 murders in Harrow Creek County, the surviving children of one of the victims, and 9 days before a corrupt judge destroys the evidence and makes 4 children disappear." He put the oilskin packet on the clerk's desk. He put Daniel's ledger beside it. "Tell Judge Porter those things, in that order, and tell him I'll wait as long as I need to." The clerk looked at the packet, looked at the ledger, looked at the 4 children standing behind Elias. Clara, straight-backed and steady. Eli, with his hands in his pockets, watching the room. Nora, holding her wrapped hand against her chest. Sam, holding his wooden horse and looking up at the ceiling with genuine architectural interest. The clerk stood. "Wait here," he said, and went through the door at the back of the room. They waited. Clara sat on the bench against the wall, and Sam climbed into her lap without ceremony, and Nora sat beside her. And Eli stood near Elias at the window, watching the street with the habitual vigilance of a boy who had learned that threats could come from any direction and announced themselves late. "What if he won't see us?" Eli said. "He'll see us." "But if—" "Eli," Elias looked at him. "Your father built a case that took him months. You carried it 6 miles in a blizzard. Your sister kept the 4 of you alive on the road for 4 days. We crossed Bitter Creek on ice that should have broken." He held the boy's gaze. "We did not do all of that for a clerk's closed door." Eli looked at him. Something in his face shifted. Not relaxed exactly, but settled. He nodded and looked back at the street. The door at the back opened 8 minutes later. The clerk came through it first, and behind him came a man of 60 or so, gray at the temples, reading glasses on a chain around his neck, coat still on, like he'd come from somewhere and hadn't stopped moving yet. He had the face of a man who made decisions for a living and had gotten good at it. Direct, unhurried, not unkind. He looked at Elias. He looked at the packet and the ledger on the clerk's desk. Then he looked at the 4 children on the bench, at Sam in Clara's lap, and Nora's wrapped hand, and Eli standing at the window with his father's particular dark-eyed attention. "Mr. Calloway," Judge Porter said. "Your Honor?" Porter looked at the children again. He picked up the ledger. He opened it to the last page, with the 6 names and the 2 words beside each one. He read it for a moment, his expression not changing, controlled and professional, but something moving behind it. "Come into my chambers," he said. "All of you." Sam slid down from Clara's lap and took her hand. Nora fell in beside them. Eli came from the window. Elias picked up the oilskin packet and followed them all through the door at the back. He had not let himself believe they would get here until this moment. Had not let himself feel the weight of what they'd crossed and outrun and endured, because feeling it would have made it too heavy to keep carrying. Now, walking through a federal courthouse door with 4 surviving Sutton children behind him and evidence of 6 murders in his hand, he let himself feel it. His hands were still shaking. He had never been less bothered by anything in his life. Judge Alan Porter read for 47 minutes without speaking. He read Daniel's ledger, page by page, slowly. The way a man reads something he understands will require him to act on it when he's done, and wants to be certain before he commits. He read Ruth Dawson's accounting records, cross-referencing dates against the ledger entries with a pencil he made small marks with in the margin of his own notepad. He read the affidavits from the 5 widows, each one signed and dated and witnessed. He looked at Beth Holloway's photographs for a long time. The mine support beams stacked neatly outside the shaft. The deliberate geometry of their arrangement. The way they told a story that no accident could account for. The 4 children sat along the wall of his chambers on a bench that was meant for lawyers waiting their turn, and had never, Elias suspected, held anyone quite like this particular row of people. Sam had fallen asleep against Nora's shoulder within the first 10 minutes, his wooden horse still in his fist. Nora sat straight and still, with her wrapped hand in her lap, watching Porter read with the focused attention of someone who understood that what happened in this room would determine the rest of her life. Eli sat forward with his elbows on his knees, cataloging the chambers the way he cataloged everything. The law books, the territorial seal on the wall, the photograph on Porter's desk of a woman and 2 grown children that told you something about the man making decisions here. Clara sat beside Elias and did not lean against anything, because Clara May Sutton did not lean in public, and held her hands together in her lap and waited. When Porter set the last document down, he removed his reading glasses and looked at Elias. "This is comprehensive," he said. Daniel Sutton was thorough. He was more than thorough. This is the work of a man who knew exactly what he was building, and built it with the understanding that he might not be alive to present it himself. Porter looked at the ledger. He was right to be worried. 6 men were right to be worried, Elias said. They didn't get the chance to act on it. Porter was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at the children. He looked at Clara specifically, with the direct attention of a man who had learned to read people quickly and accurately. "Miss Sutton," he said, "your father's will names Elias Calloway as your guardian. Do you want to speak to that? In your own words." Clara looked at Porter steadily. "Papa told us about Mr. Calloway when I was 9 years old. He said if anything ever happened to him, we should find this man. He said he was the kind of person who kept his word, even when it was hard." She paused. "We walked 6 miles in a blizzard to find him. We rode 4 days in December to get here. If my father trusted him, I trust him." Another pause. "I also trust him because I've watched him for 4 days, and he does what he says he's going to do. That's not nothing." Porter held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked at Elias. "I'll need to send a telegraph to Harrow Creek. I have a federal marshal, James Cord, currently stationed in Butte. He can be in Harrow Creek in 36 hours. He picked up his pen. "I'm issuing a federal warrant for the arrest of Judge Harlan Cross on 6 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, multiple counts of fraud, falsification of legal documents, and abuse of judicial authority." He began writing as he spoke, the pen moving fast and certain across the paper. "I'm also issuing a supplementary warrant for Chester Ames as a material participant." He paused. "Sheriff Briggs?" "He signed the search authorization," Elias said. "Knowingly." He's been covering for Cross for at least 3 years. Then he's in it too. Porter kept writing. He signed the bottom of the warrant with the flat, decisive signature of a man who had signed many warrants and understood what they meant. He handed it to his clerk, who had been standing quietly near the door this whole time. "Get this to the telegraph office. Priority. Marshal Cord first. Then I want a copy sent to the territorial governor's office and one to the federal circuit supervisor in Denver." He looked at Elias. "Cross will know something is coming the moment Cord rides into town. He'll try to move assets, destroy documents, disappear." "Ruth Dawson has been holding copies of everything for 2 years," Elias said. "She anticipated that." Porter looked at him. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, more like the satisfaction of a man who had spent his career watching justice fail because the people who should have been building cases weren't. Encountering for the first time a group of ordinary people who had been building one anyway, quietly, without resources, without institutional support, out of sheer refusal to let murder be called accident. "Mrs. Dawson and the other women," Porter said. "They'll need to be protected once this moves." "They've been protecting themselves for 3 years," Elias said. "They're better at it than most people would expect." Porter almost smiled. "I don't doubt it." He set his pen down. "You'll stay in Helena until Cord confirms the arrests. I won't have you riding back into that county until Cross is in custody. There's a boarding house on 2nd Street, Mrs. Halverson's. Tell her I sent you, and she'll have rooms." He stood, and the formality of the movement told them the meeting was concluding. Then he stopped. He looked at the 4 children again, at Sam still sleeping, at Nora's wrapped hand, at Eli, standing now beside Elias, at Clara, on her feet, and straight-backed and waiting. "Your father," Porter said to Clara, "built a case that most trained lawyers would struggle to assemble. He did it alone, while running a ranch, with full knowledge of what would happen to him if Cross found out." He held her eyes. "You should know that." Clara's throat moved, just once. "I know it," she said. "I've always known it." They stayed at Mrs. Halverson's boarding house for 3 days. The first day, Elias slept for 14 hours, which was not something he planned, but something his body decided for him, somewhere between sitting down on the edge of the bed and meaning to take off his boots. When he woke up, it was dark outside, and Sam was sitting on the floor beside the bed with his wooden horse, apparently having appointed himself as watch. "You snore," Sam said. "I know." "Papa snored too. Mama said it was like living next to a sawmill." He considered this. "I think she meant it in a nice way." Elias sat up. His hands weren't shaking. He noticed this the way you notice the absence of something that's been present long enough to feel like a permanent condition, with a kind of careful disbelief, like the ground might shift back if you put too much weight on the observation. He held his hands out and looked at them. Steady. Not perfectly, not yet, but steady enough. "Day 4, he said, mostly to himself. "Eli said day 4 was supposed to be better," Sam said. Eli was right. "Eli's right about most things," Sam said, with the philosophical acceptance of a youngest sibling who has had years to make peace with this fact. "It's very annoying." Elias got up and found the other 3 in the small sitting room Mrs. Halverson had given them. Clara writing in a small notebook she'd gotten from the boarding house desk. Nora sitting in the window watching the Helena Street below with her unwrapped hand pressed to the glass. Eli reading one of the books from the shelf in the corner, with the concentrated stillness of a boy who could read anywhere under any conditions, and probably had. Agnes Wheeler arrived on the morning of the 2nd day. She came through the boarding house door with her medical bag in one hand and the expression of a woman who had ridden hard and was not going to make anything of it. Found Elias in the sitting room, set her bag on the table, and looked at his hands. "Better," she said. "Better," he confirmed. She sat down across from him. She looked different without the cold and the urgency of Harrow Creek around her. Not softer, Agnes Wheeler was not going to be soft under any conditions, but more fully herself, the way people look when the situation they're in matches who they actually are. "Ruth sent me," she said. "Marshal Cord arrived in Harrow Creek yesterday afternoon. Cross was in his office when they came for him. Ames was at the saloon." She said it simply, the way you report facts when the facts are what you came to say. Briggs surrendered without resistance. The territorial deputies secured the courthouse and the county records before Cross could order them destroyed. She paused. "Ruth had copies of everything anyway." "Of course she did," Elias said. "The women are fine, all of them." Agnes looked at him directly. "It's over." The words sat in the air between them. Elias heard them and understood them, and let them settle into him the way cold air settles when you come in from outside. Gradually, working from the surface inward, taking time to reach the places that had been braced against it longest. "Cross is saying it was all Ames," Agnes said. "That he didn't know about the deaths, only the land transactions. That he believed the deaths were genuine accidents." "The ledger says otherwise." "Porter knows that. His lawyers know that." She met his eyes. "Cross is not going to walk away from this, Elias." It was the first time she'd used his first name. He noticed it the way he'd noticed his hands not shaking. Carefully, without making anything of it, but noticing. "How did you get here?" he said. "I rode." "Alone? 2 days. I'm aware of how I traveled. I'm aware that it wasn't a safe thing to do." She looked at him with the expression she'd deployed in his workshop when she told him to sit down. The one that had been stopping arguments for 20 years. "I have been riding alone in Montana since 1881, Mr. Calloway. I am not going to stop because Chester Ames is inconveniently still at large, pending his arraignment." A pause. "Cord has men looking for him. He didn't go far." Clara appeared in the doorway of the sitting room. She looked at Agnes, registered her presence with a quick assessment she gave everything, and said, "Is it done?" Agnes looked at her. "Cross is in custody. Your family's land is frozen by federal order, pending the estate settlement. No one can touch it." Clara stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she walked to the chair beside Elias and sat down and put her hands on her knees and looked at the floor. Her shoulders dropped a 1/4 inch, which, in Clara Sutton, was the equivalent of anyone else sitting down and crying for an hour. "Okay," she said. Just that. Eli came from the back room. He'd heard from the hallway. Elias had learned that Eli heard most things from wherever he was in a building, which was a trait that would serve him extraordinarily well when he was older, and which currently served the rest of them. He stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, and his dark eyes moving between Agnes and Elias. "What happens to us now?" he said. It was the question that had been in the room since the first night in the workshop, since Sam had asked if they were going to be okay, and Elias had said yes, and meant it, without knowing how to make it true. It was the question that a 4-day ride and a federal warrant and a judge signing documents hadn't actually answered, because justice and home were 2 different things, and one didn't automatically provide the other. Elias looked at Eli, then at Clara, then at the doorway where Nora had appeared with Sam beside her. Sam holding his wooden horse and leaning against his sister, and watching Elias with the calm expectancy of a boy who had decided a while ago that this man was the answer to the question, even if he didn't know yet what the answer looked like. "That's up to your sister," Elias said. Clara looked up. "She's the oldest," Elias said. "It's her call." He looked at her steadily. "I have a workshop in Harrow Creek. It needs a lot of work. I've got a stable with 3 horses and a forge that's been cold more than it's been hot for 2 years. I've got your father's land 4 miles east of town that belongs to the 4 of you, and I'm your legal guardian by his will, which means it's mine to manage until you're grown." He paused. I'm also a 56-year-old man who hasn't been taking particularly good care of himself and could probably use some company. He held Clara's gaze. That's what I've got. It's not much. It's what Papa said to find, Clara said quietly. He was more confident in me than the facts warranted. Maybe he knew something you didn't. She looked at him for a long moment with those gray-blue eyes that saw more than they showed. We'd stay in Harrow Creek? In the workshop? Until we rebuild your father's house on the Clearwater Creek land, which I intend to do come spring. Ruth Dawson's already told me she knows 3 men who'll work for fair wages, and I believe her, because I believe everything Ruth Dawson says. Clara almost smiled. We'd go back to school. Every day that school is open. Nora's foot needs to heal properly. Agnes will see to it. He glanced at Agnes, who had the expression of someone who had been included in a plan without being consulted, but found, on examination, that she didn't object. She's going to be our doctor in Harrow Creek. I'm asking her to stay. He looked at Agnes directly. I'm asking. Agnes looked at him. Something complicated moved through her expression. Not the professional assessment she gave most things. Something less controlled than that. Something that had to do with the 7 years since Wounded Knee, and the letters the Army had taken, and the question of whether starting over was something that happened, or something you had to choose. Harrow Creek needs a doctor, she said finally. It's an argument. It's also the truth. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked away, which was as close to agreement as Agnes Wheeler was going to get before she'd thought it through properly. And Elias understood that, and accepted it. Eli said, We'd be a family. I reckon, Elias said. If you wanted. Eli looked at his sisters. Clara gave him a look that said she'd already decided and was waiting for him to catch up. Nora was nodding, small and definite, her dark eyes certain. Sam had already lost interest in the adult deliberations and was examining the grain of the floorboards with his wooden horse, which was as close to a yes as Sam was capable of giving to anything. Eli turned back to Elias. Okay, he said, but I want to learn to carve, like the horse you made for Sam. Papa was going to teach me, and he didn't get to. I'll teach you, Elias said. And I want to read your Pinkerton case files if you have them. Most of them. Why most? Because some of them are not appropriate for a 9-year-old. Eli considered this with visible irritation and the philosophical resignation of someone who has learned that adults draw arbitrary lines and you outlast them by waiting. Fine, he said. When I'm 10. We'll discuss it, Elias said. The arraignment was 3 days later. Elias attended with the oilskin packet and Daniel's ledger and testified for 2 hours in a federal proceeding that was the cleanest courtroom he'd ever been in. No cross-appointed judges, no Briggs-controlled witnesses, no machinery of a corrupt county running interference against the truth. Porter presided. The widow's affidavits were entered into evidence. The ledger was entered into evidence. Beth Halloway's photographs were entered into evidence and produced, in the courtroom gallery, an audible reaction from the people present when Porter held them up and explained what they showed. Cross tried the strategy Agnes had predicted. Ames acted alone. Cross signed documents without knowing what he was signing. He was a victim of a trusted associate's criminality. He said it with the polished sincerity of a man who had been performing sincerity for 62 years and was very good at it. Daniel's ledger said otherwise, in Daniel's own careful handwriting, with dates and names and dollar amounts that placed Harlan Cross at the center of every transaction, every death, every dollar moved from a murdered man's estate to Redemption Holdings, LLC. Ames had been found 2 days after his warrant was issued, in a boarding house in the next county, and had made a calculation that Elias recognized as the only smart decision Chester Ames had ever made in his life. He decided that the difference between his situation and Cross's situation was significant enough to be worth buying. He testified for the prosecution. He named Cross in the ordering of every death. He named Briggs in the covering of every aftermath. He named the night of the fire at the Sutton house, who gave the order, who carried it out, what the plan had been for 4 children who were inconveniently not in the house when it burned. The plan, Ames said, had been to find them in the days after the fire, before anyone started asking questions, and make sure they didn't become a problem. Clara was not in the courtroom for that part. Elias had asked her to wait outside with the others, and she had agreed, which told him she'd already understood what Ames was likely to say, and had made a decision about whether she needed to hear it out loud. She didn't. Some truths you understood completely without needing them spoken at you from a witness stand. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Cross was sentenced to hang. Briggs received 15 years in the Territorial Penitentiary. Ames received 5 years in exchange for his testimony, which was the part of justice that never felt clean, but was the part that made the other verdicts possible. And Elias had enough history with how things worked to accept that without needing it to be pretty. They rode back to Harrow Creek on a Tuesday, 5 days before Christmas. The weather had broken properly by then, still cold, the honest cold of a Montana December, but the killing edge was off it, and the sky was the particular hard blue that comes after a storm system finally exhausts itself and moves on. They rode south through country that Elias was beginning to know differently than he had 4 days north, not as territory to be survived, but as something closer to home. The specific hills and creek beds and stretches of open plain that would become familiar the way places become familiar when you stop treating them as temporary. Sam rode in front of Elias this time, by his own request, having apparently decided that his sister had carried him long enough. He sat upright in the saddle, with his wooden horse in one hand and the reins held in his other fist, with the intense concentration of a 5-year-old who intended to be competent at this by the time they arrived. "Am I doing it right?" he asked. "You're doing fine," Elias said. "Are we almost there?" "Few more hours." "What's going to happen when we get there?" Elias looked at the road ahead of them, at the hills that were starting to look like the hills south of Harrow Creek, at the pale winter light sitting on the snow with the quality it had in the late afternoon when it was getting ready to let go of the day. "We're going to light the forge," he said. "Get the workshop warm. Mrs. Dawson is going to bring food because she's going to know we're coming before we get there. I don't know how she'll know, she just will. We're going to eat." He paused. "And then tomorrow, we're going to start figuring out what comes next." "What does come next?" Sam said. "School," Clara said from her horse, without missing a beat. Sam groaned with the full-bodied enthusiasm of a child for whom school had not yet become interesting. After that, Elias said, "we build your family's house back. On the Clearwater Creek land your father bought and paid for and refused to sell because he believed it belonged to his children. We build it back from the foundation, the right way, and we put it where it was, and we make it better than it was. And we do it because that's what you do when someone tries to take something from you and fails." Sam held onto the saddle with his free hand and looked at the horizon ahead of them, with the serious expression he got when he was processing something that mattered. Then he held up his wooden horse, looking at it against the pale sky. "I'm going to keep this forever," he said. "I know," Elias said. "Even when I'm old?" "Especially then." Sam lowered the horse and held it against his chest. "Okay," he said, satisfied, and went back to concentrating on his riding. Ruth Dawson was on the porch of her store when they came down Main Street, which meant she had known they were coming before they got there. which was exactly what Elias had told Sam would happen. She raised a hand in greeting and went back inside, which meant food was already being prepared, which was also exactly what he'd said. Walt Hensley was standing in front of the sheriff's office, the former sheriff's office, with a temporary appointment sign on the door that Elias hadn't known to expect. He touched his hat brim as they rode past. Elias nodded back. There would be time later for everything Walt Hensley had done, and what it had cost him, and what it meant. But that was a conversation for another day. Agnes rode straight to her medical office without stopping at the boarding house or anywhere else, which told Elias everything he needed to know about whether she was staying, which was that she already was. They came to a stop in front of the workshop. Elias swung down from his horse and helped Sam down and stood on the frozen street outside his own door, with 4 children behind him and the particular stillness of a place that had been waiting for something without knowing what it was waiting for. Nora came to stand beside him. She put her hand in his, her left hand, the one with all the feeling properly back in it now, and looked at the workshop door. "Are you scared?" she asked. Elias thought about this with the seriousness it deserved. Scared of what, exactly? Of getting it wrong? Of being less than what Daniel had believed he'd be? Of the particular responsibility of 4 children who had already lost everything once and were trusting him to make sure it didn't happen again? "Yeah," he said. "A little." "That's okay," Nora said. "Brave people are just scared people who keep going anyway." He looked down at her. She looked up at him with her mother's dark eyes and her father's certainty, and the particular wisdom of a 7-year-old girl who has earned every word she says the hard way. "Your papa told you that," he said. "He told all of us," she said. "We were supposed to remember it." Elias opened the workshop door. Warmth came out. The forge had held some heat. Not much. Just enough to tell the difference between inside and outside. He went in first and started building the fire back up, and the 4 Sutton children came in behind him. Clara and Eli carrying the saddlebags, Sam still holding his wooden horse. Nora's hand finally letting go of his as she moved to the bench where she'd slept 4 nights ago and sat down like she was sitting somewhere she recognized. Outside, Harrow Creek was a town that had spent 3 years looking away from what was happening in it, and had finally, because 4 children walked through a blizzard and an old man remembered what it felt like to keep a promise, looked back. Inside the workshop, the forge came back to life under Elias Calloway's steady hands, and the warmth moved outward from it in the slow, reliable way that warmth always moves when the source is real. And 5 people who had found each other in the wreckage of everything arranged themselves around it and began, without ceremony or announcement, the ordinary and extraordinary work of becoming a family. Some promises, once made, don't wait for you to be ready. They just wait until you are.